Now, the International Court of Justice says that it'll deliver its ruling on Friday on the provisional measures requested by South Africa in its genocide case against Israel. In December, its government brought the case against Israel, accusing it of genocidal acts in its assaults on Gaza. It requested emergency measures, including for Israel to suspend its military operations in Gaza. Now, the ICJ's ruling on Friday does not address the fundamental issue of whether Israel is committing genocide. That's expected to take years. Instead, it'll consider South Africa's request for 9 provisional measures. Now, if granted, that could include an order for Israel to stop its military campaign and ensure Palestinians have access to humanitarian assistance. The court could also decline to order the interim measures. Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has already hinted that he would not feel bound by any such order. That's despite orders from the ICJ being legally binding and not able to be appealed. However, the court has little power to enforce its verdicts. Earlier, we spoke to Michael Becker, a former associate lawyer at the ICJ.
The International Court of Justice, I should say, ICJ, will deliver a ruling on Friday on South Africa's request for action on Israel's violations in Gaza. In its applications, you'll recall, South Africa accused Israel of carrying out genocide in Gaza, and it asks the court to indicate provisional measures to act against further severe, irreparable harm to the rights of Palestinian people to prevent and punish genocide. Let's speak to Michael Becker about this. He's an assistant professor at Trinity College, Dublin School of Law, and was formerly working at the International Court of Justice. Michael, good to have you with us. So just for our international audience to recap what's happened here, about 2 weeks ago, the ICJ heard South Africa's arguments at the Hague, then it heard Israel's defense, and now it's deciding on the provisional measures. What exactly are these provisional measures, and which way do you think the court will go on Friday when it decides this?
It's really important to understand that what the court is going to be deciding on Friday is not whether Israel is in breach of any of its obligations under the Genocide Convention. Those are, as you've said, South Africa's main claims in the case. This is about provisional measures. That's a kind of emergency relief or interim relief that South Africa is seeking while the case is pending. And so South Africa has asked for a number of things, but the two maybe most prominent requests are, first, for an order that would direct Israel to suspend all military operations in Gaza, and secondly, for an order that would direct Israel to not impede and indeed facilitate the effective delivery of humanitarian assistance into Gaza. And so how the court addresses those two requests, if it decides to indicate provisional measures at all, is what to really look out for on Friday.
Okay, so 2 requests. Is the court likely to grant one request and deny another one? Because I understand this has happened in the past, like in the case of in the Bosnia case a few years ago.
Right. So first, we'll see if the court says that South Africa met the basic test for provisional measures to be ordered in the first place. Many ICJ experts, and I would agree with this view, think that South Africa did do enough to show that its claims under the Genocide Convention are at least plausible, and very importantly, that the Palestinian population of Gaza faces a real and imminent risk of irreparable harm. And nothing that's happened in the last 2 weeks, I think, has changed that assessment. So the court isn't limited to what South Africa has asked for. The court doesn't have to say yes or no to South Africa's specific requests. If it decides to issue provisional measures, it can formulate whatever set of measures it thinks is most appropriate.
Okay.
And so while I think the court will want to say something about Israel's military operations, I'm not convinced that they will be willing to go quite as far as South Africa has asked them to go.
Which is
ordering a complete suspension of military activities.
Okay, so you don't think it's likely to order the suspension of military activities, even though we know that the ICJ, of course, is part of the UN system, and we've heard time and time from the UN Secretary General in the last few weeks, he's called for a ceasefire in Gaza. You think that is not likely to influence the decision?
Well, I think it's more likely that the court will say something that's quite similar to what we saw in the UN Security Resolution back on the 22nd of December. So that would be instructing Israel to ensure that any military operations taking place are in accordance with international law. and abide by Israel's other obligations under international law.
Right.
I think the court also will address the request relating to humanitarian assistance and direct Israel to ensure that it's not doing anything that impedes the effective delivery of humanitarian assistance in accordance with international law.
All right. Michael, speaking here hypothetically, of course, if the court grants and rules in favor of these provisional measures that South Africa has requested and perhaps other measures, like you've said, what happens after that? I mean, is there an enforcement mechanism here?
So the court can't enforce its own decisions. That rests with other actors within the international system. In this scenario, it's difficult to imagine the Security Council playing a role. So really what this will do is place additional political pressure on Israel to work towards a ceasefire. We know that that's already taken place anyway, but this will be an additional pressure point on Israel. And also it will place additional pressure, I think, on some of Israel's strongest allies to do what they can behind the scenes to try to push this towards some kind of resolution and address the humanitarian situation on the ground.
Okay. One last question, Michael, before we let you go, and we really appreciate your expertise on this. They are deciding on the provisional measures on Friday. The court, as you mentioned early on, is not ruling on the genocide allegations, the genocide case against Israel at this time. How long will it take to make that ruling, and what do you think will be the likely outcome, having heard South Africa's arguments and Israel's defense?
Well, ICJ cases take a long time. We wouldn't expect to see a decision on the merits of this case for years. This is something that will take multiple years to be sorted out. And I think it's premature in some ways to offer any predictions here because, yes, we heard each side's preliminary set of arguments, but both sides will have the opportunity to put forward much more developed legal arguments and, importantly, support those arguments with evidence going forward. But that said, the standard to demonstrate genocidal intent under international law is very high. That shouldn't take away from the fact that other unlawful acts might be taking place. But to demonstrate genocidal intent is still going to be a very high threshold for South Africa to meet on the merits.
Michael Becker, thank you very much for your expertise and just breaking that down for us. Michael Becker joining us there from Dublin. Thank you for your time.